Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. And if you're looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 62 of Breaking Step. Still had changed the designs on the steps again. He'd added creatures from the third floor on the higher steps, the last one having a particularly graphic depiction of three gnolls ripping apart a runner. Ripping a runner apart. Still hadn't greeted him by the time they reached the entrance. The cleric by the door looked them over and nodded, while the guards barely glanced in their direction as they stepped inside. Still no greeting. Tibs hurried to the doorway. We have half the day, Don called. There's no need to hurry. You're on the wrong team, Jekyll replied with a laugh, keeping up with Tibs. If you think loot should be delayed. I'm more concerned about you making mistakes, the sorcerer said. You can stop being concerned about that, Mess said, and be certain it's going to happen. No matter how slow our leader, Tibbs lost the rest as he crossed the doorway to the third floor and hurried to the center of the hall, avoiding the triggers. Come on, he called to his team as they stepped through the doorway. He could feel the strain from his grin. It was so wide. What's with him today? The sorcerer asked. I get he likes the runs, but this morning it's like there's a gift waiting for him at the end. There's loot, Jekyll replied in a tone that said he didn't understand how Dawn still wasn't getting that. Stow, Tibbs called. You there? You here? Is this wise? Commodore asked as the others stopped talking to stare at Tibbs. Dawn's expression was thoughtful and slightly perplexed. You said that name, the sorcerer said, when we started talking about everything you can do. And I said I'd explain some of it here. Tibbs replied, eyes on the ceiling. Stow? Silence. Genny? He looked down. Maybe they were still busy getting the fourth floor. They were still busy getting the fourth floor ready for them. He looked up again. Or maybe they were enjoying the new runners going through the first floor. Stow had always liked watching how people who had no idea what to expect failed his traps. Tibbs? Don asked, his tone uncertain. How? No, not how. Who? Who are you calling out to? I'll explain when one of them answers. The sorcerers looked at the others. Any of you know what's going on? Yes, Miss answered cautiously, but I don't think we can explain it. It's not exactly believable, Commodore finished. Tibbs? Stowe asked, sounding like he was moving closer. Did you say something? Stowe, you're back. Yes, with Don on your team, I figured it was best I'd be elsewhere and avoid the temptation to comment and have you reply. Tibbs ignored the look Don gave him. He found out I have multiple elements. Then we talked and I told him everything, only some things I couldn't explain without you there to help. Tibbs, Don said cautiously. What's going on? He looked at the others, who, other than Jekyll, shared a concerned expression. Jekyll looked impatient. Don, Tibbs said, I'd like you to meet Stowe. He motioned around them. The dungeon. Is he serious? Don asked me as he named the dungeon. He didn't name it, Mess said. You realize he can't hear me, Tibbs. I thought you could do like you did with Jackal, bring a big brute here to interact with him. I don't have them roaming about this floor. What's a big brute? Don asked. The big golem in the boss room on the second floor, Mess answered, and in the final boss room. Tibbs named those too? Stowe did, Tibbs replied. There has to be something you can do to convince him. Bring one of the gnolls or the golem people. The gnolls aren't things I can... Dungeons don't talk, Tibbs, Don stated. Tibbs faced the sorcerer. According to who? Everyone, Don replied, hint of exasperation slipping in. Not me. Everyone else. Don ran a hand over his face. Is this because of all his elements? Yes, Tibbs replied. I wish you told me it's affecting your mind. Don looked at the others. Shouldn't a cleric see to him? One who can heal, he added. How come the one at the door didn't notice anything? She seemed old enough to only initiates have door duties. Kamdar said, I do not expect working with the mind is something they have learned yet. If it is something anyone outside those with mind as their element can do. Then we should get one to see Tibs, Don said, because this can't be good. I might have something, Stowe said. But are you sure this is something you want him to know? Yes, I'm done keeping secret. Then make sure he wants to know while I check something with Ganny. Ganny! He called, his voice fading. Stowe can prove he's a person, Tibbs stated, if you want it proved. Tibbs, this is a dungeon, Don said, the exasperation clear now. He looked at the others. Why haven't you done anything about this delusion of his? Just say you want the proof so we can go on with getting the loot, Jekyll said. Unless you forgot, we have a floor to clear and a new one to look at. Don studied Tibbs. All right, give me your word that once whatever you think the dungeon is going to do doesn't happen, you will come with me to someone who can help you. After the run, Jekyll said. Sure, Tibbs said. Take Don's to the first cache, Stowe said. You're going to need it, to need what's in it. Gedney agreed this is worth bending the rules for. Okay. It's going to be at the cache after the first fight, he told Don, sensing for the changes in to the triggers Danny had made. Of course it will, Don said, sounding amused. Cover your eyes, Tibbs yelled, waited a second, then released the compressed light essence. He followed it with rushing the knoll before him. He sliced the first one, flung a ball of corruption at the next, leaped over another, and stabbed it in the back as he landed, then grinned at the one in front of him, stepping back in surprise and iced it. His grin broadened as he made the metal hammer, then swung it as hard as his earth-filled arm let him, and it exploded into shards. He turned to look at the rest of his team as the hammer dissolved back into essence. We're going to have to rethink every fight, and he said, if Tibbs is not going to hide everything he can do. Or we can remind him that if he makes it too easy on himself, I'm going to have to make it harder on everyone. Stowe replied. Why didn't you use lightning? I haven't practiced it yet. Dawn won't let me. You're letting Dawn control your training, Stowe asked, surprised. He read about it and he thinks this method will work better. I owe it to him to at least try. You read about how to train someone with more than one element? Stowe asked in disbelief. I thought you were the only one. I told him what I go through to what I told him what I went through to learn to control a new element. Then he went to do some reading and came back with this oneness thing. I don't know if it's working, but I said I'd stick with it. Tibbs, Don said, challenging his tone as he absorbed the corruption left over from the fight and pushed it into one of the many amulets in his robe's pocket. The fight's over. I better get on with proving to him you're a person. Tibbs located the cache, checked it for traps, then grinned as he disarmed it. Did you think I'd rush because of this? This was set up before Stowe made the changes. Genny replied, sounding insulted. He checked inside for more traps, then took out the content, looking the lasso over. Is that supposed to prove the dungeon can think? Don asked, smirking. Even you know a dungeon thinks, Mez said. You know what I mean, Don replied dismissively. Stowe, I'm with Dawn. It isn't a lasso, the dungeon said. It's his lasso. Tibbs frowned, turning it over in his hand. How did Stowe expect him to know whose lasso it was? It wasn't like he'd ever known anyone who... Oh, but how do you have it? Tibbs swallowed as Stowe told him. Tibbs offered it to Don. In your first run after the siege, when you made it to the Rattling camp, you sent everyone on your team to search for the tents for chests. When you were alone, you held Radcliffe's lasso to your chest and you cried. When you were done, you put it in a tent and walked away to meet with your team. How? Don asked, drying his eyes. How do you know? His tone hardened. Stowe's the dungeon. He can watch anything that happens, and he enjoys watching how we'll deal with the traps and creatures. Usually he moves on after a fight, since watching us talk can be boring, but you'd never sent your team away like that. Even in that room, you usually went ahead, so you'd be the one to find the chest and then tell your rogue to check for traps. He was curious as to what you were doing. Cliff was such a pain in my ass, Don said with a laugh. I don't think he ever took me seriously when I ordered him about. He'd do what I say, what I he'd do what I said, but I could see him rolling his eyes. He called me out on the stupid stuff I got hung up on. You have no idea how often I wanted to strangle him. I even threatened to melt him once, and you know what he did? He laughed, shook his head, and promised he'd be a good little rogue. Never changed how he acted, and he swallowed. He might have been the bravest person I've ever known. After all the screaming I'd do at him because he hadn't done exactly what I told him, but something that worked better, once we were at the inn, he'd buy me a tankard. No matter how hard I pushed, unlike the others, he stayed by me. Fuck. I know of 2 times when he talked the others into staying on the team. Then he went and died because I told him to come with us. Don clutched a lasso. I didn't realize how much of a friend he'd become until you were screaming at him not to die. I tried to save him, he whispered, a lump in his throat. I used as much purity as I could, but I didn't know what to do with it then, and his essence just faded away. I couldn't let anyone see me cry, and all while we were taking down that house, I had something else to focus on. Then I was focusing on helping the people of Craggle Rock, be the voice of the guild, he spat. If I hadn't been so full of myself, I'd have told Taranya to go fuck herself, but it kept me busy, kept me from having to think about what I'd lost. In the lull after that fight was the first time I wanted to be alone, and they didn't know how I normally did things, so they didn't question them when I sent them away to look for chests. I finally said goodbye. He dried his eyes and took a shuddering breath. You didn't have to go through that alone, you know, Tibs said. Don's laugh broke. You have no idea how terrified I was that I'd look weak in front of anyone, in front of everyone. Mourning isn't being weak, Jekyll said. It's normal. Caring made me weak as far as I was concerned. Leaders don't care, Don spat. They send friend and family to their death and never shed a tear. Someone's been listening to the bards too much, Jekyll said. I didn't have to. I watched nobles and created this image of how leaders had to be. Then I promised myself that's who I'd be. That I'd never be weak again. The silence stretched. If any of you are waiting for me to make a joke about this, Jekyll said, we're going to end up missing the run entirely. Don rolled his eyes. So, the dungeon is named Stowe. It's a pleasure to meet you, Stowe said. He's happy to meet you, Tibs said. Don snorted. He has seen me act, right? How happy can he be to meet me? I was also happy to meet Jackal, Stowe replied dismissively, even if he always wins the fights. So, take that for what it's worth. Tibbs chuckled. He's always happy to meet people. Who's Ganny? Then he asked. She's his helper and advisor. She tries to help keep him from breaking the rules. He frowned. The dungeon has a woman helping him? She's not a person like you and me, or her voice sounds like a girl, Stowe sounds like a guy, so that's how I think of them. But they don't care when someone refers to him as it. And the dungeon needs to follow rules, Don asked. Wait, who came up with them? How are they enforced? No, Jekyll said. We're in the middle of a run. It was bad enough when it was just Tibs going off, asking questions instead of moving us forward to the next cache. But now, you two are just going to go on and on with the questions. We have a floor to clear. So deal with everything you want to know once we've looked at the 4th floor. Someone sure of himself, Genny said with a chuckle. He has a bet with Quigley that we'll reach the 4th floor first, Tibbs said. So, Don said as he walked next to Tibbs, you can talk to the dungeon and they answer you. Can you get them to tell you how to beat the boss room? Tibbs shook his head. That's one of those rules Candy keeps Stowe from breaking. I I never I never tell you how to beat a room. Where's the fun in that? Stowe protested. Sure, Genny said. And how many times did Tib almost get you to reveal something? Almost doesn't count, he replied petulantly. It does if I was the reason it didn't. If I was the reason you didn't. No, it didn't happen, she said triumphantly. Tib smiled. He'd missed the banter. And that concludes chapter 62 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe, hit the bell. If you want to read the story as well as the other books in the series, they are up for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of Royal Road and support me at the same time, that is on my Patreon, where we are about 20 chapters ahead. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.